Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today. We have a guest with us, Natalie Hustad, the founder and director of the South Orange County Homeschool Hybrid Program, or SOCHH as we call it for short. I love this conversation all about alternative schooling and what type of child could benefit from this type of education. We also touch on what is available to parents and students for those interested in non-public school options, why alternative schooling can be so compelling, what is involved as a parent when making this type of decision, and the academic/social emotional benefits that can go along with this, especially if you have a child who is struggling. So this is just such an important topic. I know there are a lot of parents and extended family members that are interested in this topic, and it's a confusing topic. If it's new to you and it's something that you're interested in, it can feel quite overwhelming. I know from personal experience, our family has been through this, and we were actually students at the SOCHH program and loved it. So it was it's a hard decision to make, and it's definitely something that takes a lot of weighing out the pros and cons of the situation. But Natalie does such a great job. She's so great at breaking all of this down and showing all of the different ways and options that you can go nowadays, which is wonderful. You can check out her program in the link in my show notes as well, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we have Natalie Hustad. Welcome, first of all. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you.
So happy to have you. We are going to be talking about something that's really important. It's about our kids and their education and homeschooling. And what does it look like? And what is hybrid homeschooling? A bunch of different things, because this is a very interesting topic. And I think especially since what we went through in the pandemic, a lot of parents had changed their ideas of what they wanted for their children. So we're going to talk about all that today. But I would love if you could just introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and then we can go from there.
My name is Natalie. I am the founder and the current director of the South OC Hybrid Homeschool, and we are a 3-day in-person academic option for kiddos who are homeschooling, who kind of want a little half-see between full school and part-time school. And yeah, so I run the day-to-day operations of our campus and our nonprofit, and that is what I do. And it started because my kids is what needed it, and that's how we started.
Yeah, so you started it out of a need with your own family, and then it just grew and grew from there. So maybe we could start with what it is. Like, what does hybrid homeschooling mean? Because a lot of people, and I'll share this here, this is something that we decided as a family to take part in. I've known Natalie for 12 years, and we were having some issues with the public school system, and I said, okay, I called you and I was like, what should I do? And you were like, you need to come here. And we did. And a lot of people, when I told them what we were doing as a family and the changes that we wanted to make, they were like, oh, I could never do that, or that seems too hard. And I was like, well, I don't think I could do what you're thinking I'm doing either. So tell us what it actually is.
For sure. So yeah, if somebody had told me 15 years ago that I would homeschool my kids, I would have just laughed, because that just was so far outside the realm of anything that was of interest to me. But when I found myself in a position where my kiddo was not really ready for the public school, so my son was not kindergarten ready. And yet when we tested him for anything like ADD, ADHD, or anything on the spectrum, he tested within a neurotypical range. So he just didn't have like the developmental, social, emotional part of being ready for a public school classroom with a lot of kids. So that is sort of what started our homeschooling journey. And I knew for sure when I started like going out into where we are in Orange County, seeing what options were available. There are tons of options, tons of learning centers, a lot of pods, a lot of individual classes you can take. So I did find that there was a really robust community already. And as we jumped in, what I quickly realized was that there was a lot of people who do what we term kitchen table homeschooling. That is sitting at home with your kind of what they call like your Monday morning basket, which is all your curriculum like laid out for the week, and you're like the primary teacher for your kiddos. And then they will take classes sort of a la carte at different learning centers, just like one class here, like a PE class or a cooking class or a Spanish class. And so we started that route. And then within a year or two, I realized this was not going to work for me and it wasn't really going to work for him. I needed a cohesive classroom environment for him that was just small and that differentiated to the kids where they needed it. So, right. So, like, it didn't matter if they were in fifth grade, but working at third grade math or fifth grade and working at sixth grade math, they could still get what they needed. And you can't do that in a classroom of 25, 30, or 35. So we started as a co-op, and then we transitioned into a nonprofit, and we just slowly grew over time. And it was explaining what we do to people is the hardest part of getting the word out of what we do, because it is a very unique niche. People ask us things like, why aren't you a private school? Because that's a big, thing. Because we are a learning center, for all intents and purposes, when kids come on campus, they're with their teacher all day. It looks and feels like a traditional classroom environment. It's just 3 days. We do have an option for an extra 2 days, so it can be 5 days for kids. But there's a lot of flexibility in the scheduling, but it is 9 to 2:30. It does feel like they're going to school. And that's all by intent. That's all because we did have kids and do have kids who come from public or who are going back into public or private, and we want it to be a seamless transition. They just need a smaller, more individualized attention for their kids. And so for me, it was, as we started, kind of growing, getting out to people to help them understand that while the word homeschooling can be very intimidating, there's a wide range of how you can do it. It's just the vehicle that we use as an organization, as a nonprofit, to get the experience for the kids and the services with it that we want for them.
Like we live in Southern California. Homeschooling options, if you were looking and you wanted something that looked like school typically and the schedule typically, but like there are those differences, which I think you're really being able to customize what the child needs when you can't do that in a public school. So talk to us more about that too, because I think that was kind of a selling point to me, because there are certain subjects that we were way behind in or needed extra support in, and that was not an option for us when we were in public school.
Yeah, for sure. So if your student is in a public or private environment and they are academically falling behind, the first thing they're going to do is test for services, for you to receive services through an IEP or a 504 process. But even then, that's such a broad umbrella of like the range of what is falling behind, right? So your range as a parent might feel like they are so far behind and they need services, but the school district might look at it and say, oh, they're not actually that far behind. They're within range, and therefore your child doesn't get services. Or you had services and they pull services because they graduate them out. And you as a parent might be freaking out because you need more. You feel like they need more help, they need more assistance, they need another tool, accommodation, or a modification to be able to be successful in their classroom, at least without them not feeling like they're failing or they're losing confidence in themselves. So for a lot of people, that's sort of the one end of them feeling like, okay, this is not working for us. And of course, the other end being their students aren't being challenged or they're not willing to, graduate them ahead to an additional classroom. So in our area, if you homeschool there, and actually kind of nationwide now, there are a lot of learning centers and there's a lot of pods and there's a lot of a la carte classes that you can take. There are a lot of private schools who have added a hybrid option. In our area, we are the only secular hybrid homeschool that is a cohesive day, which just means that your kiddos get here at 9 and they're here with us till 2:30, and you as the parent don't pick the classes like a college. Like, you don't go in and say, oh, I want them to take Spanish and then math 1, and then I want to put them in English 5 because they're really ahead in writing. And there's a lot of campuses and learning centers here that do that do an excellent job of that. That's just not what we happen to do. There's a lot of learning centers that might have a drop-off day that are STEAM or STEM based or even art based. And again, same. It's just not what we do. We are an academic focus, and I can go over that in just a second. But essentially, when our families come here to our campus, we are working in a small group, right? So our kids might have 12, 15. I think the most we take is 18 in a classroom. And when a teacher gets to know the student, their ability to differentiate to them and teach directly to what they need is increased exponentially, right? Because, when we talk about perceived failures within the public education realm, it's not the teachers. They're working their hardest overtime and underpaid to get everything in that's required of them. The problem is that they most of the time have too many kids in a classroom. Their focus becomes management. Their focus becomes the organization of the day, the week, the trimester, unit, whatnot, versus the individual kiddos. Of course, because there's so many kiddos, you have to figure out how to navigate them in as peaceful a way as possible, but also do directed teaching. And a lot of times in the classrooms right now, it's not so directed. Sometimes you'll have like what's called SDL, which is self-directed learning, or flipped learning, where they're on the iPad or the Chromebook, as young as first grade, first thing in the morning. So, or first thing in the day, to get them moving so the teacher can work with other students. So there's a wide variety of homeschooling options that are basically a counter to everything that is going on within the public or private school. Our particular program, we call ourselves like Public School Light or Homeschooling Plus, because we kind of fall where no other learning center does. We do use a lot of the curriculum from public school because we recognize that a lot of our families are coming from there and potentially going back there. So we want it to be a cohesive movement for them. And we also use the Common Core state standards as a guide. Now, do I think Common Core state standards are like the be all end all? No, not necessarily, but it's what you kind of working within the system that's already built, because that's the system they're going to go into. So that's what we use as a guide. We just have the benefit, like when your kiddos have come, and if there's any pockets or gaps that they don't have, we can focus solely on that. We can do that individually within each student. We can do that within a full classroom setting. We've had students mathematically before where we had a whole class that was ready to move on, and the teacher was like, they've really finished this grade, can we keep going? Absolutely. Keep working on those skills, keep working on those foundational points that they need, that they're always going to need, and go ahead and keep moving them on to the next grade, right? So like that's the other thing that's unfortunate in traditional school models, is that it's grade by grade, when really a lot of the information is spiraled year after year. And so for some kids, they need things repeated 2 or 3 times, and sometimes they need it 20 or 30 times. And eventually they have that aha moment where they're like, I've seen this before, I've read this, or I've learned this before. And that's when their recall, their cognitive processing sorts like kick in, and now they're like, okay, now they've got it there in their memory bank, in their recall, and they can pull from it, and it's a solid foundation for them. Because a kiddo could be in class and seemingly getting all the content and doing everything they're supposed to, but then when they're assessed down the line, there's huge pockets and gaps, and that's because they're usually just recalling and regurgitating out their output to the instructor, the teacher, their parent, or the state test. They're just really good at giving them exactly what's being asked of them. But the like larger concept of what's being asked is not something that they have fully encapsulated into their cognitive, memory and recall. And so those are the kids we want to also grab, because they kind of fall in the middle. They kind of aren't in trouble, nor are they kind of bored in class, but we can identify it in a very small group. You can't really identify that with kids when they're in a large class setting. And additionally, if you as a teacher have to teach to a state test, that's where your focus becomes, right? And for the reason it's a hybrid, so we kind of have this like bell-shaped curve model that we use. I guess not bell-shaped, J-shaped model that we use. For us as a hybrid, the other thing is, and I know that you've had the gal on from 1,000 Hours Outdoors, it's that same idea that to slow down, allow them to be little, slow down their childhood, give them the gift of time and the time with you as their caretaker, right? So for you to be the one that are, leading your household and leading where you want them to develop as people, right? Because we kind of have this idea, we get into kindergarten, or we get our kids to kindergarten age, and then we kind of just like outsource them. And in here where we are in Southern California, kindergarten used to be part day. So you used to have the option of like early birds for like 2.5 hours or later gators. And then they switched it to a full day. And this year they're switching TK to be available for kiddos as early as just turned 4 for the full day. Now, I completely understand it's because the system that we live within is that it's mostly two-parent working homes and households. So daycare and childcare is very expensive. So the sooner you can get them into a publicly funded program, the financially better it is for your family. It's just that sometimes it's not always the best for what the kiddo needs socially and emotionally, academically, for what you need to be able to bond with them and lead them, and for the best for their psychological well-being. So that is the idea behind it being a 3-day hybrid. And again, we do have the option for our off days, and I can go over that in a little bit. The 2 off days, we do have a program for that, but again, it's not super academic based, and that's all intentional as well, because we want them to have time to rest and play more than just, kind of creating, more than just stacking a bunch of information one direction and expecting it to all be output the same way. So we want them to be, critical thinkers. We want them to learn how to advocate for themselves, teaching them skills rather than just teaching them like each individual concept. So skill-based first, concept second.
I love that. Well, I think that one of the I want to talk more about, what makes you guys unique and different, but also before, because you did mention, Jenny from 1,000 Hours, and she does talk about that alternative schooling. So I'd love if you could share with us, what are some benefits of it? And you've mentioned a few, but just about alternative schooling in general,
For sure.
And doing it a little bit differently than a public or private.
For sure. So I think the first thing I want to start by saying is, when you parent, the most powerful thing you can do as a parent is be really intentional with your parenting and how you want your kids and your life to look. So we all know, we all say it goes really fast. Mine's going into high school, yours is going into 8th grade, and it just feels like, how did we get here? How did we go from like diapers and mom's play dates of barely surviving park play dates to boom, high school, and right? And I, when my kids were really little, I had always said, I know that the baby years, right? The, 0 to 4 or 5 are considered their formative years. But I had always felt like 9 to 13 felt more critical for some reason, kind of just intuitively. I felt that maybe that's what I was missing when I was growing up, is that felt like that feels like the age at which most parents are like, oh, I'll go back to work when they're in second or third grade. It actually feels like should be the inverse, right? Where you actually double down on your parenting, because as they start to become who they are as people, your parenting job, of course, is not done. We all know that. There's still things that, rules and structures and boundaries, et cetera, that we're working and teaching, and it's constant. And we're also the taxi cab and all that kind of stuff. But the more time you have with your kids, the more of an influence you and your values are on them. And being an intentional parent and thinking long term is really, really critical in that. And this is definitely something I had thought about. I mean, I remember being in the parking lot of my son's preschool and feeling really just stressed. I was like, isn't there like a hybrid option? Can't I just send him like half day? Can't we just keep going with the half days? And um, the fact that our kindergartens at the time were half day and he still wasn't ready, and that my daughter went and she was like so far advanced, it was like the complete opposite. Um, and that the fact that my daughter was in public kinder and her teacher of 30 years, it was her retirement year, and she said, if you can homeschool your kids, I encourage you to do that. And I was like, oh, hold up here, 30-year teacher. Why? What do you know that I don't know? And her big reasons were, one, you can curate their education. And obviously with us as a hybrid, your kids are here learning with us 3 days a week, but you have those other 2 days where you literally sky's the limit. If you want to work on language, if you want to work on, additional science and history, or just sort of like life knowledge, that is what you could do as a family. I know for you and your kids, you had like International Fridays, and that was where you would just take one country a week or a month. I can't
I
remember.
did it every
and
week. Yeah.
Yeah, every week. And you'd like post the dinner that you had, the books that you were reading. And it was just a great like world view of what other cultures were like. Like other cultures on a Friday night sitting down to dinner, this is what they would be eating in Turkey. This is what they would be eating in, Saudi Arabia. And the fact that you took the time to do that because you had the time to do that, you had that extra time. It's a gift. It's a gift for two reasons. One, because it's a gift, you're giving them a more knowledge that they wouldn't typically get. But it's the time. It's the time that you get to bond with them that they're, I'm sure that they bring it up. They're like, oh my gosh, remember? And I know you still do sometimes, but it's not as easy now. It's with them being back in full school. So, and I also encourage that too. Sometimes we are here for a moment in somebody's life, and it doesn't have to be forever. Both homeschooling, public schooling, private schooling, not being afraid to pivot is really important for what you need for your family at the time. But so the benefits of being of homeschooling, of being with your child, of doing intentional parenting is really your values. It's really that you are now the at the forefront of them all the time, right? So you are the loudest voice in the room, so to speak. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So you're the one, you in your household are the ones that get to do all of that, versus if you have them in school, or if you, and I am not judging anybody. I completely understand families who are like not only in full-time school, but they have to have before school care and after school care. And still I encourage, just like I'm sure Jenny does from 1,000 Hours Outdoors, any pocket of space you have for you to put your values first, for you to be intentional, for you to be the main primary influencer on there in them is incredible, like, and important. So maybe your Saturdays and Sundays look very, very, very family focused, because you're like, that's my time, because I do have to have them in school the full time. So with our program, it's like I said, it's like a J curve. So our preschool and kindergarten are play based. So it looks a lot more similar to what a 4-year-old preschool program used to look like 15 years ago. But now preschool and TK have gotten kind of bumped up, because the expectation is that kindergartners are leaving kindergarten reading to the mechanics of reading, because by the end of first grade, they should be reading for content. And it used to be that really it wasn't until third grade that you're reading for content, and everything else in first and second grade was still the mechanics of reading, right? So you take these littles and you bump up the expectations, and it's really, really hard for them. So we have all these families who have kids who are experiencing an intense amount of academic anxiety or social anxiety. And, they'll say, oh, I don't know why, but this is why. The pressure on them to perform, the pressure on them to hurry up is immense. And again, if you have your kiddo in that kind of environment, the best thing you can do is be the environment to counter that, right? Slow it down when you're at home, take screens away, be very intentional with your one-to-one time with them. And those kiddos who are in TK and kinder, the play-based model for which has been around for a long time. I have a couple of friends who are kindergarten teachers who, when they extended the day, that was the hope. The hope was that they could get both in, right? Like, okay, instead of doing 2.5 hours of kinder in the morning or in the afternoon, we're going to go a full day. And the hope is that we can do both play-based and academics. But really, when you have that many kids in a class, you really are just getting a lot more academics in, maybe a couple more outdoor times or art times in, and that's awesome. But it's not, I don't think, worked out quite the way that educators had hoped it would. And again, educators are doing their best. They are putting all of their creativity and love into their classrooms. So it's more just, it's a systematic approach from the top down. So, Mr. Rogers said the business of kids is play, because that's how they learn everything. That's how they learn critical thinking. That's how they learn negotiation and navigating and organization and all of this, the soft skills that are critical for your success in life, right? So it's not just critical that you have this in kindergarten, first grade, it's literally your whole life. And like an example of this is if you are playing, or if you've ever had your kiddos play and they're just like so immersed in Legos or dirt or whatever it is, and it's time to go or it's time to eat, right? It's going to either be a meltdown, or you have to give them that gentle parenting thing of like, I love what you're doing here. This is so creative. In 5 minutes, we're going to be all done. Okay. And you give them that kind of like, okay, let's now start, the cleanup song, all those kind of things, right? So that same frame of thinking doesn't change just because they walked into a classroom. And now their whole day is transition, transition, transition. And if they've not been able to recover the skill just sort of on their own or on their off days with you of open play, those are the kids who we see down the line who don't know how to be bored, don't know how to be creative. And we usually see it around third or fourth grade, where they have been, everything's been scheduled so quickly for them that they've never been able to take time to figure that out for themselves. And it's a really kind of cool thing to see. If you've ever allowed it to happen, you might have your kids play with Legos for 4 or 5 hours, and then they naturally transition it into the next thing, and they completely pull themselves out of it. It doesn't mean you can't set expectations or boundaries ahead of time, right? We wake up in the morning and this is what our day is going to look like. It just means that you are giving them the space for them to kind of come to that conclusion on their own. They're not always going to. We know that. We know that there's going to be that moment where like, I've got to go. We can't be in the Target play aisle all day long, right? We know there's a balance, that there's boundaries, etc. The point is that if you put them into a program that is all day, every day, and every day is not allowing them to have that free play, and then they get home and they're also not allowed to have that, or not, they don't have the space or the time for the free play, there's a lot of stunting that happens in their creativity, and it skyrockets their anxiety. And so now there's just this sense of feeling criticized all the time, even though you're not, and feeling like they aren't as good as everyone else. So our program is TK Kinder play-based, and the number one question people will say is they'll ask, well, will my kiddo be first grade ready? And we're really open with that. If they are only attending our program, like let's say you've decided, well, we're a public school family, but I want my kiddo to have a little bit more time with me at home or whatnot. We're like the only part-time kindergarten program literally left around. The other two that were half day, 5 days a week are now full day also. So we'll have families that are just using us for the kindergarten year, which is great, which is wonderful, but they will not be public school or private school first grade ready. Definitely on those other 2 days at home, that is something mom and dad can work on with them to get them there, but our program isn't intended to land them at all of those milestones and markers and the standards that first grade would have. And then our first grade is much more project based. It's still a lot of play based, but we start the slow academic kind of climb. It kind of feels like our first grade is the middle of kindergarten for most programs. And then by the time they leave kindergarten, second grade's a lot more academic, and then second, third, fourth, fifth looks pretty much comparable to what a public school or private school program is going to look like in terms of content and pace. But again, we get the benefit of being able to differentiate within the classroom. So our parents know, like we sit down with our one-to-ones for teacher conferences, and we let them know, like, this is where we're working with them. Here's everything we're not going to get to in the year. We're still in 3 days able to cover like 90%, but there's still things that we want parents to cover at home. And we give them, guides and here, do this and suggestions. There's certainly other things they can do beyond what we do here. But the point is that we want our kiddos to be academic, because that's what I wanted for my son, right? I loved the homeschooling community, but what I felt like what was missing was like peer-to-peer collaboration and working with a teacher. Like I didn't want to be the main teacher for my kids. I wanted them to have other authority figures. I wanted them, one of the criticisms I got when I started myself homeschooling and then our program in general, and this is well-intentioned, well-meaning friends and family, is, well, you're not preparing them for the real world. No, ma'am, I am not preparing my 7-year-old to be the CEO of a company. I'm preparing my 7-year-old to be a successful 8-year-old and my 8-year-old to be a successful 9-year-old, etc. Right? Like I'm not trying to get my kindergarten or to have homework just because the real world has homework. Like that's not success to me. I want them academically confident first. I want them socially and emotionally solid first before I add content on. Because what happens is if you have a really anxious student who does not have a growth mindset, who gives up really quickly, and then you're like, well, that unit that we just worked on that you're upset about, that was last week. We got to go forward. We got to keep going down the line to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, because that is how it works. It's like a train, right? And you can't really get off the train tracks of that, or I should say, administrators and teachers can't get off the train tracks because it has to go one direction. That's what all of this, we have to land at the end of the year having finished all 36 chapters of the book and covering all 152 state standards, right? Like that's what their goal is at the end of the year. And ours is not. Ours is, where are you as an individual, as a student? Where are you as a class? And what do we need to do with our lesson plans to adjust it up and down to make sure everybody is getting what they need? That might look like one student only writing 2 or 3 sentences with sentence starters, and another student who we're really encouraging them to write paragraphs and keep going. And how can we conference with them and we work one-to-one with them to really expand that knowledge. So as our program starts like slow and starts to ramp up, we get criticism from both sides of the table. We'll get families who want only play-based and hands-on and nature schooling, and then they get to our 3rd grade and they're like, this feels too academic, and it's like, that's about right. Yeah, it does, because it's intentional. And then we'll have families who want all academics in kindergarten because they want to rush ahead, or they feel like they're critical years to, or the best is, oh, they're already doing all this math stuff, so I really want to push this. No, you do not. If your kiddo is showing a lot of propensity for academics, just foster that in a very gentle way using play and manipulatives. You do not need to add more onto that because it's the fastest way for them for you to it's no longer fun for them. Once it's no longer fun, you've lost them. You've lost their confidence, you've lost their academic acumen, and then they feel like they've been told, oh, you're so smart, or you're so bright, or you were working so at this high level and then you just stopped, or something like that. And they feel like there's something wrong with them. So gently fostering that is very different than trying to excel them academically ahead. I don't know if that answered. That
Yeah,
was a lot.
that's great. A few things came up, and one of them that I loved that you talked about is like one of the criticisms being like, well, you said you're preparing your 7-year-old to be a successful 8-year-old, and I think that's really important, especially where we live. But I'm sure all over feel such pressure, and I know I did too. Like as parents, to make sure that we're keeping up and we're doing everything to support them and to make sure that they're successful. And then, it's like you even see it with sports where there's families who are like freaking out about college baseball when they're like in T-ball. So
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to kind of get swept up as like, oh, I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing, and it needs to be more, not less. And, especially when you think back to like when we were in kindergarten and how different that looks now for our children. It's so different. And so I think that's such an important lesson. And it goes back to something that I know we've talked about on my podcast before, which is doing what's best for
Mm-hmm.
your family, for your child, which, even within my family, I have 2 kids that are completely different, and so do you. And really trying to remember that is the goal and the important thing to remember, and not like what everyone is doing, because it can feel isolating, I think, when you kind of go down this path if you're doing something that isn't the norm. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time. And, I think for some parents who are listening to this, maybe you could talk to a little bit about how do you even start this? If you're like, okay, I think this sounds good. I mean, the first feeling that I had was, can I even do this? Like I was
Right.
overwhelmed. I didn't know how hard it would be. And maybe you could talk to that a little bit, because that's a real concern.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely goes back to that kind of idea of intentional parenting, right? You and your spouse, and usually I have one spouse that's on ready and the other one that's like, oh, my so and so won't let me, or is worried they're going to be the weird kid,
Yeah.
and et cetera, right? So that's really common. Although I definitely feel like, yeah, that's definitely really common. So I think that the first thing is to create a list of your pros and cons, and create a list of your non-negotiables, right? Like, what is it that you're really hoping to get out of alternative schooling? And that might look like a pod, that might look like a hybrid homeschool like what we do, that might look like kitchen table homeschooling on your own, or using, digital products or something to help you academically get them ahead. What is it going to gain you, and what are you going to lose, right? So you're usually losing time and money. And so your gain is that all the other things, right? Is that you are hoping to have more time as a family together, that you are hoping to, maybe you already have a kiddo who has some anxiety about things, and those are things you wanting to work with them on, but you want to do it in a slow, kind of methodical, easy, manner, rather than just, jumping into public or out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that for families who are already in a public or private school, full-time schooling, a big one we get a lot is, well, they have all their friends and they have all their socializing. And that is the hardest one. We have a middle school here, and our middle school is very academically focused, more so than our K through 5 is, because our middle schoolers, most 80% of them are going to go into public high school. So we want to prepare them for that part. They already are going to go from this tiny little fishbowl to like a big jump. What we don't want is them going to have the social jump, but also then academically not feeling prepared. So it doesn't necessarily mean our content jumps in middle school. We definitely still continue to differentiate to each student and what they need, but we expect a lot more of them, right? So if they're writing a paper, there might be a lot more conferencing, rewrite, edit, rewrite, edit, rewrite, and they'll get exhausted. They're like, why you made me write this? Because we have high expectations, because we know what you're going into is going to have high expectations. Little brag, we just had our first class, our original class of kiddos that started SOCHH just graduated. So all our 8th graders are now going into public high school, and all of them are going into honors math, and all of them are going to honors English. So these are kids who not necessarily naturally started there, and that is where they're jumping into. So that was like a huge moment of excitement for us, because we've had, of course, 8th graders who graduated before, but they had additional schooling. But this particular group has only had us. So we felt we're very excited to follow what their next 4 years look like, because we haven't had that data yet, and that is something that we do collect, is data points, through everything that we do and through all of our assessments. But kind of going back to what I was saying in terms of, having intentions of what it is that you want to get. And then the next thing is it definitely gets to become like analysis paralysis, where you have too many options. But you need to think about, do you want them in a hybrid program where they're going a few days with an instructor all day and then the rest is at home? Or do you want them where you're kind of picking a couple of classes here and there and kitchen table homeschooling? Do you want a religious-based program? Do you want a secular-based program? Are there certain courses you do want your kids to take versus you do not want them to take? So once you've kind of settled all of that out, then it becomes like, what are the actual, like, how do I get out of a public school and how do I actually homeschool? Okay, so in the state of California, there are 3 ways to homeschool. You can homeschool by filing what's called a PSA, which is a private school affidavit, or a PSP, which is a private satellite program. So both of those, you are telling the state of California, the PSA, you are telling the state of California that I am choosing to home educate my child. And so you get this form called a PSA, and it's always in October, and you fill it out. And it's really weird to fill out, because it'll say, like, who's the principal? That is you. Who is the record holder? That is also you. Who is in charge of HR? You also, or your spouse. So it feels really not legitimate, but it is. I promise, everyone does it who's filing a PSA. And then you file it with the state of California. You are telling the state, you're telling the California Department of Ed, I am holding the records for my child, which means you have to hold the records. You have very little oversight from the state at that point. They, of course, will send you information on the state standards and, a handful of things. But the assumption is, for the most part, you are choosing to homeschool because you are either living remotely, not near an academic program that is public, or that you have a value set that is differing from what the California state standards are, and you are wanting to do those. Now, that being said, your record is your record. So your record still has to hold all of the classes that they've taken, and that is what you use to go to high school. But if you're like, well, we're not going to worry about it because we're going to K through 12 homeschool, you still need that for college. So you do have to keep accurate records. It's much easier than it sounds. It sounds much more intimidating. It really isn't, but you do want to make sure you're keeping an accurate record. Because, like, for example, for our kiddos that just came in, they all had to test, right, with their public high schools to get into the classes that they were, to find out where their levels were. So you can't just, like, make it up, because they're the ones that would lose out, right? So if you are like, okay, I love that idea, don't want oversight, want to do it myself, and when I say no oversight, I'm not talking in nefarious terms. I'm talking, like, for example, 3rd grade is geography and 4th grade is California history, right? But if I have 3 kids and I have a 6th grader who's supposed to be doing world history, maybe I just want to make it easy on myself and have everybody do California geography one year, and then the next year we all do California history, and then the next year we do world history. You can't do that if you're in a public program, and I'll get to that in a second as to why. You, at this point, as a PSP or a PSA, you have the option to do whatever. You could do fractions in second grade, which is not a standard until fourth grade. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying there's no oversight. You are not beholden to the California Department of Ed to do X number of minutes of this type of math, this type of language arts, this type of social studies. And if you're like, okay, well, I love that, but I don't think I want to be responsible for the records, then you would join what's called a PSP. And in that case, you are paying an administrative private school program that basically tells the California Department of Ed, hey, I'm going to take these 12 different PSA families and I'm going to hold their record. And so when you actually transfer, it looks like it came from that program because you create a name. So like, let's say I was like Acorn Academy or Hustad Academy, or, you were, the Glow Up Academy, whatever you wanted to make it, you put the name down and that is the school of record, right? So as a PSP, it's the same. So our kids look like they went to this place called Crossroads Academy. It is not an actual physical place. It is just a place that keeps their records for them. Because I filed a PSA one year and then we switched to a PSP because running SOCHH and doing all that was just too much work. And then the third way to homeschool in the state of California is through what is called a non-classroom based charter. It is still a public school, and you are assigned a teacher of record that essentially meets with you once or twice a week, and you are given you're given a specific set of curriculum to follow, and you're working with the teacher to making sure you're feeling good. Pros and cons again to that. So lots of oversight at that point, right? So lots of like having to turn in paperwork, and every charter is different. There's about 12 of them in our area, but I think there's like 30 statewide that are non-classroom based charters. And each one is different. So some you have to meet with your teacher weekly, some twice a week, some you have to actually take a class with your teacher. For us, we obviously are a learning center. So there are worksheets and there's quizzes and there's writing samples. And so these are samples of the work that you would be keeping as a homeschooling family, right? You're like filing those away and you're somewhere or at least samples of it. You don't do everything. So your teacher of record wants to see all of that. Sometimes they'll accept it just because you're with us or at another learning center or taking another class somewhere. And sometimes they're like, nope, you have to do our work. And so then it's like double work, depending again on your homeschooling. If you're a kitchen table homeschooler, you've never done this before, it is a great option because you have somebody who is a certified teacher who is working directly with the charter and the California Department of Ed to make sure your kids are on track and where they should be. You do have to state test though. So you are still following the train track to some degree. The nice thing about it is that you don't have to be in class all day, right? So as a homeschooler, you're like, I can let them sleep in, and really academics can take place in an hour and a half or two a day, depending on how organized and efficient you are as a parent, and depending on if you're taking classes or if you're doing it all yourself. So that is the nice thing, is that, while you do have to follow everything in order, you do have, again, you get time and that whatnot. And the charters will give funding for different vendors. Okay, so this is like the big myth. Everyone's like, oh, they pay you to homeschool. No, the state of California does not pay you to homeschool. But every student in California, whether they are a public school student or a brick and mortar charter student or a non-classroom based charter student, they are allotted ADA funds. That's your attendance daily allotment, right? So brick and mortar schools, it's like $18,000 per student. Charter schools, it's less, it's like $14,000. Then non-classroom based charters, it's even less, it's like $7,000 or $8,000. As a non-classroom based charter, the directors of that non-classroom based charter get to choose how to distribute that ADA funding. 70% has to be for student benefit, 30% could be administrative. But there are charters that they will pay for like any and all subscriptions that you can think of online. Adobe Suite, study.com, nationalgeographic.com, every, Brain Bop, every single subscription. And that is just like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of online academic education. But that you as a family are allotted maybe only $800 for funding, and that funding has to be in material, right? So like paper, pens, a whiteboard, whatever you need to educate your student at home. All the way to the other end, which are academic programs that are non-classroom based charter academic programs that say, we're going to give you a lot of funding. We're going to give you like 3,500. All of that can be used for a vendor. So a vendor is us. We are a vendor. Kumon is a vendor. Mathnasium is a vendor. Sylvan Learning Center is a vendor. A lot of teachers as individuals for tutoring are vendors. And so what that means is that they are willing to take a certificate of payment and they bill the charter directly for whatever percentage of the funds. Now, obviously, 3,500 is not going very far these days. So you have to figure out if it's worth it. Does the funding for the amount of times you're meeting with the teacher and what they're asking from you, does that feel equal to, input for output, right? There's always a cost and a gain to everything. So for some families it does, for some families it doesn't. But that's like the actual mechanics of like, how do I homeschool in the state of California? The other one is people feeling like, well, what do I do now? Like, what do I do next? I'm ready to homeschool. Literally, you just walk in and you just say, I am pulling my student. They're going to another program. They will usually hand you a piece of paper. You do not have to legally fill out anything. You literally can walk away. You can ask for your child's records right then and there, or you can just send them something that's requesting them to mail them to you. But a lot of times they'll have like a paper where they're saying, well, we are required to get from you where they're going. That is not a law. That is not a state requirement in any way, shape, or form. That is a district internal requirement and it's a request. But they might present it to you to make you feel like, oh my gosh, they're really giving me a hard time. Like, where are they going? I've heard families who went in and directly said, like, we're going to pull our kids to homeschool. And then they became like a kind of a back and forth of, threatening type of situation with the record keeping. That's not legal either. So I've lots of people in the homeschooling community will say, oh, well, just don't tell them you're going to homeschool. Just tell them you're going to another academic program. It's whatever your comfort level is. I've never had any problem walking straight in, helping families and whatnot, just because I know what is the legal basis and what is not. And again, schools, especially during the pandemic when they were like losing student after student after student, there's a fear base there because then they're losing funding, of course, for the next year and whatnot. So those are the like actual mechanics. You can literally just walk in and say, I'm not returning. Obviously, it's a little easier to do in the summer than it is to do in the middle of the year. But if you feel, I have a couple of feelings on this. The first one is if your student is academically falling further and further behind and they are just broken, they are emotionally and psychologically broken, move them. Move them tomorrow, yesterday. Move them faster than you can finish the sentence. Because even if you're only moving them for a month, even if you're just giving them a break, the reward you will reap is their psychological well-being. And that is crucial to their life as an adult and as a teenager and just a growing being. Once you've moved them, then you can figure all of this out, right? So again, it might be temporary. You might say, I had this kiddo crying every day or melting down, or it's just so much, it's heartbreaking for me to send them. They get out of school get out of the car saying they don't want to go every day. Move them. If you can do it, whether you're working and you have a caregiver, the grandparent, aunt, uncle, somebody who can be with them and you're not sure where to land them, I encourage you to move them. If you're on the opposite end and you have a kiddo who starts acting out because they're bored in class, in the same vein, I would move them. But in that case, I would be a little bit more slow to do it. And you have to be a little bit more intentional with where you're going to land them, because you want to make sure that you're putting them into a classroom environment that is challenging for them, that is giving them what they, fulfilling their needs. And so they're challenged. They're like not bored in class and acting out, right? But if you have, if there's not a bullying situation or a stress or a social emotional issue that's happening, and you've just decided this is just not what I want for my family, this is just not quite where I want to be, I do encourage you to, depending on what time of the year it is, if it's like past January, just let them finish out the year. It becomes so much easier for them, for you, for everybody involved, for them to finish the year. Also, their teachers are like mid-lesson trying to, wrap things up. And again, we're talking about a non-bullying situation, a non-negative experience where their social, emotional, or their physical safety is not, being compromised or whatnot. So those are the suggestions. And if you have a middle schooler, hear me now, you have to move them before fifth grade. When you have a middle schooler who is graduated fifth grade and the parents now decide, oh, we're not going to do middle school, we're not going to do sixth, seventh, and eighth grade like all of their peers are, the pushback you get is so intense that you start to doubt yourself in your decision. Because a fifth grader, or sorry, an exiting fifth grader, incoming sixth grader, is a lot more opinionated about what they want, as they should be. That's biologically, anthropologically, psychologically correct. They're starting to just pull away from their character and starting to become their own people than a fourth grader who's going into fifth grade, who has for them, mom and dad are their comfort still. That's still a reflection of who they are as a person. So if you have just decided, like, your kids are 2 or 3 or in second grade, and you're like, oh no, I had a horrible middle school experience, I don't want my kids to go through that, whatever that reason is, but you're still going to go to the public school or private school, I'm just encouraging you to get them somewhere by fifth grade. It'll be so much easier. They have a year of making friends. They don't feel as isolated. Now, we've definitely had middle schoolers come from public to us who have been very closed off, had walls up, had a lot of like, am I going to make friends here? And our particular program, our middle school is awesome. I mean, yes, I am a teacher. I'm definitely biased. I'm a teacher for the program, but there's 3 of us that are teachers, but we do so much with these kids. They have so many trips and field trips. We do an away camp, and they just, as a group of 22 to 30, because it's all sixth, seventh, and eighth combined, they just bond so much, and they're so special. Every year that we've moved up and up and up, it's just been such a special group because of the way that we as the adults create the experience for them, because we do know that they have friends in softball and friends in baseball, or they like see their public school friends and they want that. But we are also, we're a cell phone free campus. We are big on creating a social safety net for them where everyone is respected and that friendships really can blossom and grow. And that is like the most important thing. Like, we will have days or weeks where they are just not getting along because they become like siblings or cousins, and things are happening. And we're able to completely throw out curriculum because we're a learning center, not a school. We don't have to like land at the end of the chapter, and do bonding things, do things where we're teaching them, respect for each other's opinions and voices. And that is so rewarding because you're catching it in lifetime as it's happening, right? So you're catching that glare or that not so nice comment, because that happens with kids everywhere. They're not always going to get along, and they're trying to push their edges and their boundaries and figure out what they can get away with. And if they dislike somebody, they've not quite learned internal monologue. They've not quite learned decorum, right? Like they've not learned all that yet. They are learning it. And unfortunately, it can result in a lot of, unkindness and bullying. And, now with chats and text message and, that all of that kind of content to go home, we really encourage our families, like, we do not allow cell phones on campus. We really encourage to not have a lot of group chats going, but it is how they socially connect. And that's, it obviously is away from our campus, but those are the things that we're working on for our middle school kids. But I definitely notice the difference when we have public school kiddos come in, and usually they are coming into us from a public school environment because they have been bullied or they've gotten themselves in a not great situation, and all of their guards are up.
Yeah.
And it's our job to help work with the parents to soften that for them. And it always happens, and they're usually just so thrilled to be here after a month or two of just like working on it together.
That's so great. I love what you said and how you shared if this is right for you, and when you know that it's time to pull your kid, and giving, I feel like it's like a permission slip too for parents, because it is like, what? Like, I can't imagine doing something like this, but in some cases it's really needed. In some cases it's really so beneficial for them. And it was for us as a family. So is there anything else that you want to share with us before we say goodbye? Anything else you want them to know about SOCHH in particular or about the program? Let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, it's a hard sell what we do, because we get 300 inquiries a month, of which maybe one will result in an enrolled student. So you got to take 50% of that, and you have to assume a lot of them are just curious. What do we do? What is this like? You have, of that 150 left that are still listening or looking, half of them that we are a fit for in terms of like value set, academic set, etc. And then of that, probably 90% is just, it feels so outside the box, right? It feels so different. So if you have a student who is just struggling, socially and emotionally, and they are just, every teacher conference is, they have so much potential, but they get so stressed and overwhelmed. Our environment was designed exactly for that kiddo, because it doesn't matter when they get into our class, it doesn't matter the level they come in at academically. We are able to differentiate directly to them. It's just a matter of the parents having enough. It is a big step. It feels very, you know, it's very people get very nervous about doing it. It feels so different, so outside the box. And trust me, I am, you know, that is me. I am you. We are we. Like, I I am not, a lot of people say, oh, well, you're very anti public school. Not at all. Not at all. I think the public school system does such an amazing job with 60% of the population. The problem becomes that other 40% that are not doing well, right? So the 60% that are doing amazing are thriving in a public school system. The other 40% of that 20 have an IEP or a 504. And that is a very misunderstood program for the state of California. And the other 20% are the kids who are just falling through the cracks. A lot of times they'll have social anxiety, they'll have academic anxiety, they might have ADD or ADHD that's either diagnosed or undiagnosed, or the worst combination is a kiddo who is academically performing okay and has ADHD and having a lot of anxiety and social meltdowns in class at school, because they do not qualify then for an IEP. Why? Because they are academically doing okay. And so it's like there's that the IEPs are designed for academic help, not necessarily social emotional, unless it's a behavioral issue, right? It's got to like get to a certain level of extreme, which is usually not kiddos who have ADHD or anxiety. They usually don't fall there either, right? So that 20% of kids are just falling through the cracks, and a lot of them are undiagnosed as high achievers. They're and gate and gifted. They're just they're so far through the cracks. They are not given those programs or those resources either. And so this is a perfect program for those type of kiddos as well. But I mean, we're the opposite, and we just registered for public high school, and I had never done any of that. So I had to and am learning now that system, and making sure that my son is ready. I mean, he's more than ready. He's so excited. And, every kid that we've had here, I guess that's probably a good marker of like what we do. Every kid that we've had here, even if they have left at a certain grade to go back into school, because life happens, right? Mom and dad might not have a flexible job anymore. They might not be able to afford to do a homeschool program, need to put them in public or whatever it might be, or they move. Every kiddo has said that they miss our program, that they really, really, really loved our program. We're very small. We have less than 80 kids as average. We have room for 100 kids total every year. Being in a small environment, I just feel, is so powerful for kids. There's something unique about it. And it is, if it's something that parents can give to their kids, I think it's a gift that keeps on giving. Again, even if you don't end up at K through 8th in a hybrid homeschooling situation or a homeschooling situation, and you're just like, even if you just did 1 year, it's so magical, those memories that you make with your kids. And I know that, another question parents will ask me, moms in particular, is like, oh, do you have any time for yourself? Like, it feels like it's really a lot of work for you. And I am very, very honest with them. Yeah, no, I don't have a lot of time to myself. I don't have a lot of time that is not spent thinking about or working with or directing my own personal kids' education along with the whole program, as a whole. But the nice thing is that I won't look back with any regrets, right? Like I definitely have to find pockets of space for myself. I don't get the benefit of like dropping them off and going to an actual regular job and then coming back and picking them up, where I have like time and adult conversation space for myself. But I get the rewards on the other end, which is I'm incredibly close with my kids, and I get a lot of conversations with them that I wouldn't normally get with them. I get to teach them things that, again, I just wouldn't be covered, or we'd forget about it. So it's something that if you thought about it or thinking about it, I highly encourage you to continue to research it, continue to look at it. And again, it doesn't have to be forever. It's a gift. It's a gift that you're giving yourself and your kids long term.
Well, I love that. It's true. And as a parent, not you, because you stay and you run the program, but we do get time. We get to drop off the kids, and it does look like a pretty full day. And I actually added on the Monday and Friday program as well. So my kids were in school for 5 days, and
Yeah.
I did have time to get my things done. So that's a good point too. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this. I know this is such an important topic, and a lot of kids are struggling, and parents don't have the first idea of how to handle the situation. And this is such a great option for so many of the kids who are suffering in public. So thank you for sharing all of this and being here with us.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Jess.
When I first started my wellness journey, I had already been in the skincare industry for years, working on client skin and as an educator for multiple skincare brands. When I learned about how the toxins in our personal care and beauty products could have a negative impact on our health, I knew I needed to make a change. I was used to the result-driven products that I was working with, and I was not happy with the natural products on the market at that time. Although they were safer and cleaner, they did not meet my expectations for results. I created Simply Just Skincare to deliver the results my clients demanded from their products while using natural, toxin-free ingredients. You can check out my clients' results and reviews on my website, simplyjustskincare.com. In 30 days, my clients have reported more hydrated skin, less appearance of fine lines and wrinkles, and more of an overall glow. Our top sellers include our Repair Toner, our Hydrating Undo Serum with hyaluronic acid, and more. I am offering my listeners 20% off their first order with code PODCAST. Check it out in the link in my show notes to get glowing today.